I want to introduce two people from Bhasha Research and Publication Center who have been generous to spend their evening time, some of their evening time with me this morning, because it's about almost a 12-hour difference. It's 11 and a half versus 12 and a half, depending on daylight savings time, I guess. And so I want to thank you both for joining me. And on behalf of my students, we're very excited to learn more about the Ratwa and about Bhasha and so forth in our conversation. So the first person we have is Sandhya Gajjar, and she's a trustee and plays a lead role for Bhasha Research and Publication. And Sonal Baxi, who is a lead person in Bhasha as well, with a lot of expertise in the cultures and current policies and political situation relevant to tribal peoples of India in general, but especially those in Gujarat. So I will let them introduce themselves much better than I just did. But I also want to say that they are two very good friends of mine too. And I've had the pleasure and honor to get to know them through our previous project, which was funded also by the US State Department's Communities Connecting Heritage Project through the Washington, D.C. based organization, World Learning. So that was my chance to get to know them back then, and I feel so grateful to have had that chance. So I'm going to start, I guess, by asking the two of you to introduce yourselves. So Sandhya, would you introduce yourself first and then Sonal second?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. So my name is Sandhya Gajjar, and I am a teacher. I'm an art historian. I write on contemporary Indian art. I write on developmental issues also. I have been with Bhasha as the founder trustee right from the beginning. That is, when it was established in 1996. I have also been trustee with the Heritage Trust, an organization that looks at conservation of heritage buildings and intangible heritage as well. And I was one of the core committee persons who got Champaner Pavagadh, a heritage site, medieval heritage site about 40 kilometers from where we are in Baroda, on the UNESCO World Heritage Site listing. It's very close to the Adivasi Academy at Tejgarh, where we also work as far as Bhasha is concerned. I am also with the Navrachna Education Society as an active trustee, and we run 5 schools and 1 university.
Hmm.
My interest in tribals and marginalized communities has been there right from the beginning. It was very basic earlier, but once I got into Bhasha, it became a little more in depth. And I'm able to understand quite a few things about these communities now. So I'm able to share my points of view the way Mike would, depending on the questions that Mike would frame. And I sincerely hope I'm able to help all of you students understand where we're coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandhya. And Sonal.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. My name is Sonal, and I have a background in English literature. After I completed my MPhil from the Baroda University, I joined the Bhasha Research and Publication Center. And from there on, I've been working with both indigenous communities who are known as Adivasi communities in India, as well as the denotified and tribal groups. The areas in which I have been exposed to working with both these marginalized sections includes the culture, education, development, and even healthcare issues, arts and craft, languages. So that's a wide spectrum. And I then also went on to do my PhD on the denotified communities. And I think my research has now also helped me in my own work with Bhasha in the different areas. I would just like to add that we had a wonderful time. I and all my other colleagues who had come to the University of Northern Colorado in 2018, and we really look forward to a renewed collaboration with this project. And I hope that I and Sandhya ma'am will be able to answer all your questions to the best of our abilities, and which will be helpful to your students and team as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal. Thank you both for those wonderful introductions. I think it will give my students a better chance to know the context around, why I invited you to share what you know about the Ratwa and about Bhasha in general. So let's begin with actually that with Bhasha. Could we learn a little bit about your organization and how it came to be and what roles it plays in the lives of Adivasi communities?
Yeah, sure. So Bhasha was started by an academician, Dr. Ganesh Devi, who used to teach English literature at the university in Baroda. While he was still a teacher, he used to go around and visit nearby villages and trying to understand their issues, etc. When he was 50, he decided to take early retirement and he established Bhasha. Now, the idea behind establishing Bhasha at that time was very academic. He was engaged with the question of disappearing languages, or languages which were dying or endangered. And so he was working with the Sahitya Academy, which is the national, an equivalent of National Literary Foundation, something of that sort, which awards projects in literature to writers, and it also gives national awards for the best novel or the best collection of poetry and stuff like that. Sahitya means literature in Hindustani or Hindi and Sanskrit, and that is why it is called the Sahitya Academy. Academy is kind of a form of the word academy English, because we were also a colonized nation, so a lot of English words have been Hindified, and so it is called academy. So it is the Sahitya Academy. And his book, called After Amnesia, won the Sahitya Academy Award in the year 1993, 92 or 93. And in this book, he explored what the collective Indian imagination has lost because of the colonial years in between. We were ruled by the British for almost 200 years. So, what we were ruled by the Mughals before that and other empires before that, but those continued to be Asian. So there was some amount of give and take. Whereas the British were a completely foreign people who came into India, and their habits were different, their clothing was different, the language was, everything was different, and how they successfully were able to destroy the confidence which the people had in themselves, and that therefore that book was called After Amnesia. That there is, there was a period where you completely forgot what you were. Anyway, so he had this association with the Sahitya Academy, and then he convinced the Sahitya Academy that there are many languages in India. India, by the way, has more than 700 languages and dialects which are actively spoken even today. So he said that there are many languages which don't even have a script, and these languages like all languages, no matter how many people spoke it, is always extraordinarily rich in imagination, in its knowledge systems, in what it is able to express, how it is able to express things, how human beings interacted with each other, what were the names for things, why were they called that, what were their understanding of nature, and all of that. And once a language dies, a huge amount of knowledge base gets lost with it. So the first project which Bhasha got after it was established was very academic in nature, and it was to translate a number of writings in the northeast. Northeast is an area in India which has a long border with China. It's in the eastern part of India. And it has numerous tribal communities. It's one of the richest tribal areas of India. And the project was to translate the works in these languages into English so that the rest of India can read and understand what these people are thinking and writing about. But while we were doing that, in that process, we were able to understand that which which are these languages which are dying. And when we asked that question, we found that it was basically the languages which belonged to the marginalized communities, to the indigenous communities. Because they didn't have power, they didn't have a voice, their languages continued to remain in an oral format and didn't have a script. And so it was, they believed, or they were made to believe, that their languages were not good enough to have a script, were not good enough to be the official language of any kind of transaction. So then it was that we realized that if these people, if we don't work with these people, if the people disappear, the languages are obviously going to disappear. There's no point in keeping a language alive with nobody to speak it. And so we became a little more activist in our attitude, which, the academic part continued, but which became activist. And we decided to have an academy for the Adivasis or for the indigenous communities in an area where they live themselves. So the government gave us this land on lease at village Tejgarh, which is in the middle of the Ratwa tribal community. And it is 90 kilometers, so about 40, 45, 50 miles, in your terminology, from Baroda, where the city where we are. And we started the academy over there. The first thing which came up there was the museum. We wanted the tribal communities to understand that what they own, what they know, what they think is important to their culture is something which should go into the museum, and people should come and see it and enjoy it. And then, so the museum started. With that, the library started. And then with that, we had a small, administrative wing. And then we started classes. We started teaching people over there. And then we started the Vasant Shala, a schooling program for children of migrant tribal families, who dropped out of school because they would travel with their migrant parents, and therefore they would not have a school to go to. So we decided to have a residential school. We couldn't afford too many children. So we, at the moment, have 60 children, both boys and girls, from the age group of 6 to 12. And we try to bring them up to a standard, an academic level, by way of which they can be mainstreamed into regular schools in grade 5 or grade 6. And that's the way they can finish their education. But the important part of the schooling program was that we began to teach them in their language, in their mother tongue, which was not what is happening even today in rural and tribal India. Every school in rural and tribal India, the medium of instruction is the state language, and it may not necessarily be the language which is spoken by the children who attend that school. Since it is a language which they do not understand, most children drop out because they just cannot understand what the teacher is speaking. And often they teachers might get violent also with them. And so obviously they don't come back to school. So our experiment with this, with Vasanta Shala, which is the schooling program, has been quite successful. And we have a number of university interns and students and teachers studying education who come and study the way we are working with these children. So that is, so Bhasha has an office in Baroda, which is an administrative office. We look at I sit there, so as does Sonal, and we look at, funding possibilities, proposal writing, managing the programs that we have, managing the projects that we have. And at the Adivasi Academy, all our actual work gets done. So that is the background of Bhasha. Your team has visited our office in Baroda. and it has visited the academy as well. Mike, you could perhaps show pictures of both places to your students and they would get an idea of what we do. But we have a very extensive websites also. Bhasharesearch.org is the basic website, and there are 5 more. So all of you can go and look at the website. And we would love to have any of you who would like to come and intern with us. You're most welcome.
Thank you for that
Thank you.
invitation too. I think that that may indeed happen once, of course, the pandemic is behind us. Maybe we should continue that conversation about opportunities for UNC students
We
to do
almost
that.
have the pandemic behind us, so not a problem
Right.
in India.
Great.
We started the vaccination program in full swing.
Mhm.
So our case phenomenally going down, and touch wood, I hope they don't turn up again.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I had the chance to visit the Adivasi Academy twice, and both times was such a fascinating experience. And then I got to meet some of the children the second time, and it's an amazing operation that you have there that's changing so many lives. Sonal, did you want to add anything to what Sandhya's shared?
No, that was quite a comprehensive
Agree.
summary, an introduction and summary to Bhasha's work. I would just like to add that Bhasha is a Hindi word, not only Hindi, but it's used across several languages in India. It basically means language. And many people, visitors to Bhasha, uh, they first think that Bhasha is a language institute. Actually, the word Bhasha was chosen as voice of the marginalized communities, as the Adivasis or the denotified communities. And over the years, we have worked in very many spheres and we have had many activities. Some we have succeeded, some we have not. But basically, our work revolves around languages, especially the languages not recognized by the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution recognizes only 22 Indian languages. So there are many more which are not recognized. So we work with languages, we are into publishing, we work with arts and craft of tribal communities, we are into healthcare, development, and education. So, and we find that all these issues and aspects are interconnected. Uh, so unlike NGOs who are working maybe one or two areas, we work with several. And I think Bhasha's distinct feature is also that we'll work especially in languages and culture that not many organizations are into. That is all that I would like to add.
Those are great additions. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we have a really nice picture now of what Bhasha, where Bhasha came from, what it does, and its significance to the tribal communities of India, and also to educating the Indian public and beyond about the needs and the value of these tribal communities. So, thank you for that. Let's move now to the Rathwa for the rest of our conversation, because that's of course what our current project is about. And so maybe you could give us a sense, a little bit of history, a little bit of geography, a sense of where the Ratwa are located now. And of course, you mentioned this, Sandhya, with the location of the Adivasi Academy, but maybe we could get a more precise sense, and then also what would be the traditional homeland of the Ratwa people?
Traditional homeland of the Ratwas is the Chota Udeipur district in Gujarat. When India was undivided, at that point of time, when the states were not formed before independence, this entire area, which is now Madhya Pradesh, a separate state, and Gujarat, a separate state, that it was a common land, and that area was known as Rat Vistar. Vistar means an area or a region, and Rat was the name of the tribe, Rat or Ratwa. So that entire area was called the Rat land or Rat Vistar. Now, after India became independent and into states were formed, so Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh were separated. But even today, we find that the Ratwas are spread across the original land, It is now, of course, in Madhya Pradesh and in Gujarat. So in Gujarat, it's the Chota Udeipur district. In Madhya Pradesh, it is across the Alirajpur district where we find the Ratwas living. So this has been the original homeland, and they continue to live there. Sandhya ma'am, you may like to add something on the historical background.
Mike, I'll be sending you some images of from this book, which has this in great detail, and it's very complicated. So it is difficult to speak about it actually. Maybe you would be able to read this and explain to your students a little better. The Ratwa, by the way, is one of the larger tribal communities. In India, we have tribes of different sizes. The Ratwa tribals are quite a lot, and sometimes they are also um, confused with the Bhil tribals as well as the Koli tribals. And that is where, especially with the Koli, that is where their current situation or the situation of conflict is coming from, because they have been, okay, let me redefine, I mean, take a relook at that. You see, when India became independent in 1947 and the Constitution of India was written, it was decided by the writers of the Constitution that there existed in India a groups of people who were classified as castes. Okay, the caste came from the ancient Hindu belief of four types of people in society. So there were the Brahmins, who are supposed to be, if you imagine that as a human being, then Brahmins, so the head, the intelligence was the Brahmins. They were at the top level. Okay. Then were the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas were the warriors. So those were the arms. They defended the land. Okay. Then there were the merchant class, and that was the stomach. The merchant class created the money, created the economy. And at the lowest end, at the feet, the bottom, the legs and the feet, were the Shudras. And the Shudras were the what was then unfortunately called the untouchables. So they were supposed to be the most inauspicious people you could ever meet, because they did all the dirty work of the society. And because you were born into a Brahmin family, or you were born into a Kshatriya family, or you were born into a Shudra family, this whole idea of reincarnation, the whole idea that what good you do in this birth gets reflected in the birth which you have in the next, in when you are reincarnated. So if you do good in this birth, then you will be reincarnated in a better level of the caste system. This was the belief. Right now, the because and see, when you have systems like this in place, there is invariably going to be a lot of exploitation at every level and in different ways, right? So the Constitution of India said that the castes should be given a special status, because for hundreds of years they've been downtrodden, they've been put aside, they've been on the edges of society, and they should be given a chance to better themselves. Now, along with the castes came the tribes, because these were the indigenous people. So it was also decided that the tribes would also get similar status, so that their children get a better deal in life. So there came to be what is known as the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribe. And now, I mean, over the last 70 odd years of our independence, for every government position, or for whatever it is, in whatever you apply for, there will always be a regular fees, regular ways of movement for the people in the mainstream, and there will be a different way if you belong to a scheduled caste or a scheduled tribe. And therefore, you got, I mean, your movement was a little bit smoother down that line, right? So, the fact that you want that kind of reservation, you want that quota, that if there are so many government jobs, then so many jobs would go to those people who are applying from the scheduled caste or the scheduled tribe background. That created a different kind of hierarchical system, a different kind of exploitation, a different kind of corruption practices also. Now, the present issue which we are going to talk about in our project is this issue of the Ratwas being called the Ratwa Kodi. You see, now the Ratwas don't want to be called the Ratwa Kodi because the Kodi is a caste, it is not a tribe. And if they are if they accept that, because you see what happens in India, we have every 10 years we have the census. So in the as the sense and the census is I mean, it's a huge country and we are a huge number of people, so it always takes more than almost 10 years to be able to do all the work which requires for the census data to be collected. So and this is something which is a simmering thing for the Ratwa communities, and nobody has been able to address it. None of their leaders have been able to address it. And the thing is, because there are more castes than there are tribes, in their share of the pie in the scheduled caste thing will go down if they come into the caste and not into the tribe, because there are comparatively lesser tribes. So the Ratwas are now saying that no, we are not Kolis, we are Ratwas, and you cannot call us Ratwa. Now, information about that is also there in this book, which I will send to you, so you can take a look at it and read that. So that is the background to this whole Ratwa business. Thanks.
Thank you. That is so interesting and complicated for people.
Very complicated. So yeah. I thought it is best if I send you this.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And certainly complicated for people in American society who don't understand the caste system even. So a useful resource. So thank you for sending that along to us. Let's see if we can talk about just that. Let's see if we can move into differentiating a little bit more the Ratwa from other groups. What makes them sort of culturally, or with regard to their cultural identity, what sets them apart? What are the different aspects that set them apart?
I would say
sorry.
Yeah, please. No, please go on.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
No, I would say that, see, the language is different from other tribal communities because most tribal communities in India have their own languages. And many of these languages are recognized by linguists as dialects and not languages. That is a different debate altogether. But in terms of the cultural practices, most of the tribal communities in India, their life cycle is related to the seasons and the agricultural cycle. So that is similar, but in terms of how they are distinguished from other tribes, one would be their language, also their music, their arts and craft, their some of the rituals would be different. But what is also interesting is what ties them to other indigenous communities. One is the scheduled tribe status because they are, at least at present, they are listed as a scheduled tribe, though there is this whole debate going on. So that is one. And also, they are related to the forest. Tribals in India are known as the forest people. They have had this long historical relationship with the forest. And thirdly, I would say what also binds them with other indigenous communities in India is the issues, which are mainly, if we call it in Hindi, is Jal, Jungle and Jameen, that is water, the dispute over water, the forest, and the land. Those are three primary conflicts which tribal communities have with the state or with the larger society.
Thank you, Sonal. That was very informative. Sandhya, did you want to add anything to that?
I think she has capsuled it very well.
Yes.
I will read out something to you, which which is not exactly related to the question you asked, but it might throw a little light on what tribals in India are thinking or what makes them different
Please,
from
that sounds great.
other farming communities. Okay, so this author writes, in everyday life, a tribal society may have many features in common with a peasantry, but by definition, tribesmen are not surplus producing peasants. This is a very interesting differentiation. It is peasants who are the subordinated givers of labor or surplus to a dominant social or political class. In contrast, and theoretically, the affairs of tribal people do not depend on the markets or the law and order institutions of larger societies whose centers of power are located in forts or towns. Tribal households have a degree of self sufficiency not evident amongst peasants. The tribal society thus has a structure that is simpler than class or state society, need not be a pejorative understanding at all. Stages of social evolution do proceed from the simple to the more complex in terms of economic activities and their connections, the number of specializations in the economy, the variety of roles in political activities, and so on. Besides, over the long term stages of cultural development succeeded one another in a certain order. Nowhere in the world did states come into existence when people had just begun to hunt and gather. Nowhere in the world did industrial capitalism appear before feudalism. Neither does the synthesis of state and tribe in medieval or early modern times in northern Africa and Western Asia delegitimize the notion of the tribe. I think that's very interesting, isn't it?
So it has to do with their traditional and even current
Yeah.
relationship to the existing larger governmental and social system. Yeah.
She also goes on to say this, and this is really even more interesting than what I just read.
Mm-hmm.
She writes, as for inequalities, in every society, some individuals are richer than others. Some men have leadership qualities and enjoy prestige, and others do not. But rich and poor are not what we mean when we say that tribes are egalitarian societies. What it means is that being rich does not entitle a tribesman to exploit the labor or the hospitality of his kin. Ideally and originally, tribes or lineages collectively hold title to land and pastures, so that no member of a tribe can be deprived of access to the group's resources, just as no member can sell away land that is closely associated with the ancestor gods. A tribesman does not enrich himself or rise to political leadership by pushing others down. Also, the son of a charismatic chief does not necessarily succeed to the chieftainship. So, in this context, this whole issue of water, forest, land becomes very, very complicated for the tribes. And it is impossible, really, truly, it is impossible for mainstream communities to understand this attitude to life.
Yeah, that is very interesting. It makes me think also of the. So, what this author was doing was, again, setting apart the organization of the tribal communities politically and economically from the organization of the larger dominant culture and society around them. I'm aware that the tribal groups, including the Ratwa and I'm sure many, have their own decision-making bodies, correct? That are they called panchayats or something like that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, they are called the panchayats, and which are different from the panchayats which are officially government bodies. For instance, in Tejgad village will have a panchayat, which kind of administers the village level activities. but the Ratwa community in that area will have its own punch also.
And
So it
how does a person become seated in that decision making body? How does that work? Where they a person is it elected, or in what other ways do they become part of that decision?
I think be elected, and also age and wisdom counts a lot.
Does it include men and women?
It sometimes does, but unfortunately, what we are seeing is that as the urban centers begin encroaching on tribal areas, the unfortunate attitudes of the urban, which are patriarchal, are now coming into their behavior as well.
So originally, originally there isn't that kind of patriarchy embedded in the society, but as you bring in the other ways, yeah.
Yeah, the studies which we have of tribal societies, as well as our own experience of dealing with them, go to prove that these are very egalitarian societies. So there is a great deal of gender equality, but it is being impacted by the inroads which urban Indian value systems are making. Because you see, they're watching serials, on television. They're watching films, and all of these are made for mainstream communities, and they uphold the values of mainstream communities, which are not necessarily the values of that they work and live by.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. Sonal, did you want to add anything to what Sandhya's been saying about their social and political organization, gender roles, anything like that?
No, I think she has summed it up quite comprehensively.
Yeah, it's a
So
fascinating topic. Please.
one is seeing a transition in many of the value systems, but one beyond a point, one cannot stop that influence as well. So it's a very difficult situation.
This recalls to mind, and this wasn't specifically part of the questions I had for you, but it certainly recalls to mind our visit with you as part of the introduction you gave us to much of what's going on in Gujarat historically for both mainstream society and also for the tribal communities. And we visited a temple, and it seemed, and let me know how I'm misunderstanding this, but it seemed like there was an emergence of a mainstream Hindu. What would you call it? Is it a sect or anyway?
Yeah, this was the Akshardham temple that you visited in Gandhinagar.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and it
near Ahmedabad.
and it seems like my understanding that I took away from it was that this is a very powerful movement that's affecting tribal communities also, who are not originally Hindu, but who are now being encouraged to adopt this particular version of Hinduism. Am I correct in that assessment?
Yes,
Yes,
to a large extent.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that process.
you're quite right, Mike. Actually, what is happening is that tribals are now being treated more as political vote banks. So there is this, and also there is this whole notion of India being a Hindu nation. So there are many sects uh, born of Hinduism or related to Hinduism or advocating Hinduism in different ways, which have now made inroads in many tribal areas. This is visible, quite visible, even in the Chota Udeipur district where we work. So there are many tribals who you join these sects, and each of these sects promote a different belief. And the overall thing, as Sandhya ma'am said, was that these are actually if you look at the basic principle, it's like being recognized by the mainstream. So tribals believe that if they accept the value system of the mainstream, they would be considered being a part of the mainstream. that actually does not happen in reality. Many a times, there are even tribals I've heard from friends in at the Adivasi Academy from colleagues that many a time the tribals also go and donate money to the temples and the sects. So it's not only a kind of political vote bank; it's also a money raising drive in whatever capacity they can give. So of course, it's not. I would not say conversion, but Hinduization, yes, that is happening in a large scale. That is true.
Thank you. Sandhya, did you want to add anything to that, to Sonal's assessment?
What I would like to add is that if you saw the Swaminarayan temple which you visited, right, it was quite impressive, wasn't it?
It seemed almost like, we talked about this, it seemed almost like a theme park, almost Disney, like Walt Disney theme park.
Yeah, but it also the subliminal message it sends is that the people who build this have a lot of money. That if you believe in this God, you're going to get some share of that largesse. Okay, and what are your gods? Your gods are people are those little clay horses and stuff like that which you put under a tree. All right, you're never going to better yourself in life ever. That can be a very strong message, isn't it? So that is where we also find, I think Sonal will tell you more about that. We often find that the staff at the academy, some of them, would take leave because they have some kind of a Hindu ritual in their home, which is not what they should be doing anyway. Their community doesn't require it. But we have been exposed to that also now.
Mm.
So those are very strong points. Of course, let me also tell you that the tribals are a very smart lot. Huh? They are not as foolish or as they just don't believe everything you tell them. They know which side of the bread is buttered. Sometimes they agree to it and they do what you ask them to do, but they at the end of the day they believe in their own gods. Like for instance, the person who is the honorary director was telling us that recently there have been some deaths of young people in many Ratwa homes. And the general belief is that you are forgetting your own gods and going after other gods. And that is how your own God is taking revenge on you. So please come back into the fold.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a really, is this a recent phenomenon?
Very recent, very
Yeah.
recent. He told this to me just a few months back that no, it's
Wow.
things are changing.
That is so fascinating. Oh, wow. Okay. So what the picture you're painting is you know, appropriately complicated in that people are enticed by the wealth offered by a powerful sect, but sometimes they don't go in completely blind. They go in knowing that they can take advantage, but at the same time not convert 100%, as Sonal put it, Hinduization, but not necessarily conversion. I think that's a really important distinction here. And plus, we have this other movement within the community raising or developing a kind of narrative that encourages people to consider what they're losing in making those transitions. Very
Yes.
interesting.
So I don't know. We will try and see. I mean, this whole COVID business got in the way because I was quite interested in trying to,
Absolutely.
and find out what exactly happened. But
Right.
then
Right.
this COVID thing stopped all our movement in that area. So
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thank you for both of you for that. That was very, very interesting. So maybe we can talk a little bit more now about Ratwa tangible and intangible cultural heritage. Could you give us some examples of how they would identify that?
see, the tangible heritage is very clear. They have a particular way of dressing, which you can identify them in many ways. those who become a little more modern or westernized or urbanized wear different kinds of clothes. But one of our people, Vasant Bhai, I think you must have met him at the academy. He is in charge of the school. When they get together for these conventions, when they have their leaders talking about this, especially this Ratwa Kori business, they will all come dressed in their own clothes, or they will wear the turban, or they will have some visual identity of their belonging to the community. So dress is, of course, extremely, extremely important. Then the way they celebrate their own festivals is very important. That is something which is very visual. The rituals, these are all tangible elements. The fact that many of them have the Pithora painting in their homes, that is important. Their own language is very important. That's the tangible thing. The food, the kind of food they eat, the kind of food they cook at different for different functions in the lifespan. There is birth, and there is marriage, and there is death, and all kinds of things. So what are the foods cooked? They are also of a particular kind. The jewelry they wear is of a particular kind, which identifies them immediately as to who they are among tribal groups. The intangible would be the songs which they sing, the epics which they have. A lot of them have very, very rich traditions of literature, oral literature, which has been handed down for over generations, over centuries. Um, Things get added in, things get left out. And Mike, this is something which even I found it very difficult to believe. But I was talking to one of these Ratwa men who recently did his PhD in something or the other, whatever it was. But he was researching on their epics. And he was telling me that now there are only four very, very old people who can recite some of them. And he was trying to find out from me whether Bhasha can get some kind of funding to be able to document that. So I said, yes, we can help you. But he said, see, the problem is that I said, send me a proposal, which is a very mainstream way of talking. You send me a proposal, then we'll see how we can do it. There has to be a timeline, there has to be this, that, and the other. He said that, I'm sorry, I can't give you a timeline. I said, why not? He says, see, these people, it's only at particular times in the year when they are supposed to be able to recite that whole epic. It is only at that time they remember the whole thing. So supposing I, as a researcher, go to them and tell them, why don't you start, reciting? They will not. They just can't remember it.
Wow, that's fascinating.
But if it is a particular day or in a particular month, at a particular time when they are supposed to say it, that is when they will say it. And that is when I have to do my work. I don't know when that is.
Wow.
I can't give you a framework, like that put me in a fix, because I said, well, how can I get you any funding to be able to do that? I said, anyway, try to do it. I'll get you funding afterwards. At least you've done something. And I'll definitely do that. But this is the way things work, because I think they live a kind of imaginative life, which is a kind of life we can't really think of, in the way we have been brought up.
Wow.
What I to you about the fact that they will not have surplus. They do not believe in having a lot of money in the bank. That is not their sense of economy.
And there's so much to what you're saying. Let me go with that first, and then go back to the epic recitations, which is amazing. So with the surplus, how culturally can you or they justify not having surplus? What sense does that make in the mind of a Ratwa person?
I really have no idea. I will I will I will tell you something which was narrated to me by Dr. Devi, and you make what you can out of it. But it is such a strange story. He was. This was a time when the Adivasi Academy was still being built. He was on his way from Baroda to Chota and he must have stopped somewhere in on the way to have a cup of tea or something of that sort, which we always do. So this was very close to Tejgarh, okay? And he was sitting there, and one of these elderly Ratwa men came and sat next to him to have a cup of tea, okay? And that man then pointed to his watch. Dr. Devi was wearing a watch on his left hand. And he said, "What is that?" So he said, "This is a watch." So he says, "What does it do?" So he says, "It tells me the time." So he says, "What do you mean by time?" So he says, "It tells me it is like 9 o'clock just now, and I have to reach Tejgarh by 10 o'clock. So I am able to understand that from here, Tejgarh is about 20 minutes away. So I can enjoy my cup of tea for maybe 10 or 15 more minutes before I get into the car and travel." So he says, so he tells you that. But why do so he said, "Why do you need to get to Tejgarh at 10 o'clock?" So he said, "Because I'm meeting somebody there." He says, "Yeah, but that guy will wait. How does it matter? You enjoy your cup of tea and you carry on." Then he says that, okay. Also, then he said that, don't you have eyes? That's what he asked him. So he said, "Of course I have eyes." And he said, "You just look up in the sky and you know that when the sun is right above your head, that's the time to, sit quietly and have lunch somewhere, you know, and take rest and then start working again. You don't need a watch to tell you all that. And when the sun sets, that's the time to get home and to rest." So, so Dr. Devi laughed and he said, "Yes, I think there is some sense in what you say." And then this man showed him a large silver bangle which he was wearing on his arm, on his hand, which all of them wear. If you remember, any of those, all those guys wear a huge silver bangle on their hands. It almost weighs 500 grams of silver, pure silver. Okay. So he says, "You were wearing this watch. I'm wearing this. If does this watch ever need repairs? Does it ever stop?" So Dr. Devi said, "Yes, it does. There is a battery." So he says, "Then when do you have to go and buy the battery every now and then?" So he says, "Yes, I have to buy the battery every now." He says, "Then why are you wasting your money over such stupid things? You go and buy silver." Every time you need money, all I have to go is to go and mortgage this, form this somewhere. I get the money I want. I earn the money back. I go and collect what I have back.
Okay, yeah.
That's
Mike, I would just like to add here.
Yeah.
See, the whole sense of not accumulating money or any other material. It is not that they are not materialistic, but what we realize over the years is that they have a very close affinity with nature. So they take from nature as much as their need is. They do not exploit it. So there is a difference. So they live in a kind of non-accumulative way of life. So they do store grains and things in their house. It's not that, but it's all to a large extent it's need based, and also it's a collective way of life. So like if somebody in the village does not have food, others will help. It's not an individualistic way of life where each one is thinking or living by himself or herself. So there are collective ways where people can survive in a tribal society. At least they continue to do so even now. as things change, one doesn't know what will happen in decades to come.
Right.
So I think that could be one reason for their non-accumulation, uh, non-accumulative way of life and philosophy in a way.
Mm. That makes sense because you come from a tradition where you help each other out in times of need. Someone has something that another person doesn't have, and so they share. And then also you can depend on the natural world to provide what you need at given times. So why accumulate more than you need or more than you might need and sell it or accumulate it to have wealth and power over someone else or something like that? It just doesn't make sense culturally.
Yeah, so and it's also they do not exploit nature. That is one thing which is there across tribal societies. And also when you're talking of the heritage, I would like to include architecture, their belief systems, and also their knowledge systems. They're all part of their cultural heritage.
So, can you say a little bit more about the belief system? Because we talked a little bit about how it may be impacted by the mainstream sects and so forth, Hindu sects, but what fundamentally, how might you define their spiritual traditions, religious beliefs, whatever you want to call them?
These vary from one tribal community to another. There may be certain similarities, but one cannot define their belief system. I think one has to understand their different belief systems, which may be related to their rituals, their way of life, their cultural practices, their social practices, the institutions they have. For example, their own customary laws, or marriage as an institution, or family as an institution. So there are a range of belief systems where one has to understand their philosophy behind it and why they practice it and how these have emerged and how they bind them into a society, into a community.
Sandhya, did you want to add anything to that?
I think she's put it very well. Very
Hmm.
well.
Can you tell me a little bit about, because Sandhya, you mentioned this earlier, and I think it's an important thing to highlight. As you, or Sonal, you talked about this also, that you have this kind of grandiose architecture and exhibition, I suppose, of wealth through these temples that are becoming very popular, Hindu temples that are becoming very popular. Whereas you said, if a Ratwa person might look at the small horse that they have, that's a pottery horse, that's part of their religious beliefs, and think it inferior in some way. So can you describe what are these pottery items and what are they used for and where do they show up? How do people use them, make them, and so forth?
No,
See, in
these
case
are terracotta clay horses, which signify their ancestors. So these are funeral kind of images, which are often kept under a specific tree. And it is believed that the ancestor spirits reside in that. And their gods,
also as
yeah, you're saying something, Sonal.
yeah, they also have this. I don't know if you saw those wooden sculptures which they prepare. These are also their ancestral figures which they keep within their in their houses or in the backyard of their houses, in the place surrounding the house. Now, whether these are clay horses that are offered as even during rituals, they are supposed to actually protect the village and also individual homes. Like they have this ritual on a certain time in a year when they keep these clay horses on the boundary of a village, and there is a ritual worship that is offered. At times, there is also an animal sacrifice that take place, which continues among the Ratwa community even now. So these kind of rituals are like paying their tribute or their prayers to the ancestors, and it is believed that it is a kind of these spirits protect them.
And so these rituals, are they seasonal rituals or are they happening at certain events in a person's life, or when do those happen? What's their schedule if there is one?
No, it is a seasonal ritual. Yeah, like you have, you celebrate. I mean, the Mexicans celebrate All Souls Day, for instance, or in the US you celebrate Halloween in a
Mhm.
different way. Correct. So it is
Correct.
definitely during a certain time, because that kind of period is there in Hinduism also, where you remember your ancestors, because it is believed that if you don't keep your ancestors, you don't respect them, you don't keep them happy, then they can get very angry with you and bring all kinds of disasters in your life. So they need to be respected at all points of time. Actually, it is a kind of Thanksgiving. If they were not there, you would not be there in the first place.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, so that ties back to what you were saying about how maybe that.
And they,
Go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
and
Please.
they are also seen as a protective force,
Mm. Mm.
because amongst tribal communities there is a huge sense of belief in evil, and the evil eye, and the witchcraft kind of traditions, and you need to protect yourself and your family against that.
Yes, and so this idea of protection, but also appeasement, right? That you want to make sure the ancestors are honored and appeased, because if they aren't, then they can cause some trouble for you, right? And
What kind of insurance do you have against?
mm,
Yeah.
insurance, yeah, that's good. I like that. That's very interesting. And so what you're saying, this connects to something you were saying earlier, which is that there may be the beginnings of a movement to encourage people to return to their traditional beliefs, and basically taking advantage of this belief that if you're not honoring your ancestors, then the ancestors can create trouble, including maybe even causing the deaths of the next generation, really the children. Yes. And so there's a power behind that, because there's this long tradition of belief in honoring the ancestors. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, it is very much so.
Very interesting. And I want to respect your time too, because this has been a long conversation, but I feel like it could go on forever, and I would just keep learning more and more. But I
We
do
can
want to
take it up
return. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
we can take it up another day.
Yeah,
It's not important that we finish all of it today.
of course. In fact, that might be a really good idea to do that. Let's return to the epic, the recitation of the epics again. I want to learn a little bit more about that. And so here's what I gathered from what you were saying, that first of all, there are a few people left who have these epics memorized in the tradition of oral traditions, rather than written traditions. And so it is sadly a dying tradition. But the other aspect of this is that this memory, that's stored in the minds of these people, is triggered, if you will, or summoned by external circumstances, a time of year, certain kinds of ceremonial practices, something that's sort of like a trigger for the memory, so that the person really doesn't have the recall of the memory until the time is right. And that is just absolutely amazing. It says so much about how the relationship between the human mind and just human culture and the environment. So I think that's amazing. And if you have more to say about that, that would be great. And the other aspect and I know that Sandhya, you and I had a conversation about this some months ago, that these epics can take quite a long time to actually recite.
Yeah.
And so all of that is stored. It's not in a book, it's stored in the mind of a human being. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And Sonal, if you want to add anything to that would be quite interesting to learn more about.
Well, I have not really heard many of them. I have heard one or two, which they call Vyakhyan. And these are all night performances, and a lot of people come and listen to them, etc. And they include some amount of acting also, and it's almost like the person is in a trance, and he or she, whoever it is speaking out the epic and singing or reciting it. What this person actually told me, this Dr. Rajesh Ratwa, who I was talking to, is that it's not as if they cannot remember anything. It's just that they seem to remember it in bits and pieces. And even I found that really, honestly, very, very strange. How can somebody at some point of time remember the whole thing and at other points of time not remember it? But I was looking at my own self, and you know, we have the Garba, the dance. There's a festival called the Garba. Hello, you have you ever seen that festival?
I have never seen it. No.
Okay. Anyway, so it's a 9 nights of dancing. It's a simple dance, simple steps, but it goes on and on and on, and everybody enjoys it. At the end of that, there is a prayer which is sung to the mother goddess, because it is around the mother goddess image that the dance happens. Now, you will not believe it, but I can sing that entire prayer only at that time. If just now I'm sitting here and you tell me to recite, I will recite, be able to recite it, but I will be able to do it in bits and pieces. It is
Mm,
possible that because a whole lot of people are singing it, I can remember it. It
sure.
at that time. So perhaps I remember it in bits and pieces. But
Sure.
because so many other people are singing it, I think I imagine I know it all.
Yeah.
But it is something which it is stored somewhere in the memory, and it just comes out at that time. It doesn't
Yeah.
come out at the time. So
Mhm.
I then began to realize that what this man is saying is perhaps very true, that it requires a certain environment when that person can actually come out and recite it.
Mhm. That makes sense. In some Native American groups, for example, there's in the Great Lakes, there's this tradition of birch bark scrolls where they would draw symbols on them and connect the symbols with lines, but it wasn't immediately decipherable by anyone. In fact, only some had access to it, and some had access to understanding these symbols only at certain levels. But it was a mnemonic device, meaning that when they sang these songs, that it would encourage them to remember how all of the pieces that you're talking about were linked together. So it wasn't like words on a page where you're singing the words on a page. Instead, it was symbolic representations that encouraged your memory to connect all of those dots. And so, in that case, it's symbols as a mnemonic device, but it also seems like there are many other kinds of mnemonics out there in the context of a festival or the context of a ceremony or something like that. So that's really fascinating information. Sonal, did you want to add anything to that to your knowledge?
Yeah, I would just like to add that see, most of their recitals and the narration of an epic or a legend, they happen on certain specific occasions. They just don't happen randomly for entertainment at any point of the year. So maybe a person's or an artist's refusal uh, to not remember, maybe just respecting the sanctity of that recital for that particular occasion. He may be may remember the whole thing, but may not want to recite it at that particular time, which is not the actual time of that recital within
Yeah,
that community. It could even, yeah, it could be that too.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So again, humans and our cultural worlds are very complicated. So trying to tap into what's really going on is always a fascinating endeavor, but it can yield multiple answers, some of which are even contradictory. So I appreciate that perspective on it. I think there's probably a lot of truth behind that. One thing I wanted to ask, and maybe we will use this as a way to, well, one more question after this one as a way to close out for your evening and my morning. Um, let's talk a little bit about your knowledge about the pitoras, the paintings. This is something my students will be reading about a little bit, and I would love to hear your perspective on their significance in the lives of Ratwa communities and families.
I have a paper in English written on this. I can just send that to you.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Perhaps, so in light of that, could you share maybe either Sonal or Sandhya or both of you share your own personal experience with these paintings or the process or anything that you'd like to share from your own experience?
Well, I have seen a pitora in one of our academy persons' homes. That is all. But from what I know of that entire process, it's an amazing process, and the story is amazing as well of the god, and that paper will tell you everything. So it's very complicated, but I will also send you a lot of images, so
Oh, that
you
would be
can
great.
show you those images of the pitora, because it is a story. It encapsulates their entire world, the world of the Ratwa, and it is in a large rectangle, and the pitora, the Babo Pitoro, who is the main god, he is seated on one of the horses, and then there are the smaller gods who are before and after him, and then there are different styles of making the pitora also. It's not just one style, and there are different ways in which that is done. But what is interesting is that pitora artists are able to put in contemporary elements, like they will show an aeroplane flying because that's what they've seen, or they will show a police van coming into the village because that's what they've seen. So a lot of things change in the pitora, but there are many things which will always be there. There are many mythical images which are there in the pitora and which are there for a particular reason. There are actually two ghost images also, and those ghost images are identified because they are colorless. And that is because that is such an important part of their world, that this also exists. That's what it says.
What are these ghosts? What significance do they have?
See, the pitora is an instrument of appeasement. Pitora is made in a home because there is the family is experiencing some problems, and the problem is not getting solved. So they say, okay, we will do a pitora and please solve our problem. That's their prayer to the god. And then the making of the pitora is not just that families, the family of course pays for it, but the whole village is involved. And then there is a village, a lunch for all of them, etc. And the whole process goes on for about 3, 4, 5 days when the pitora is painted. And the pitora is worshipped and it is looked after. And when the pitora becomes old and because it is on the walls of their home, it also tends to go bad in the sense, it gets rubbed off or it starts looking shabby, etc. Then there is a way of how to put it to rest also. So it is a living god in their own homes, and it is there again, as I will use the word insurance against something bad which might befall the family. And the pitora, the story of the pitora is also very interesting, and it's quite a complex story. The god himself is illegitimate and is striving to get his actual place in the family. And so the baby pitora gets lost, and then suddenly one day the mother finds it on the wall, and that is its resting place, and that therefore the pitora is made on the wall.
Wow.
So
And this information is also, more of it is found in the paper that you're going to send?
yes, I'll send
Oh,
it to you.
exciting. Very exciting. That's really good. Sonal, did you want to add anything?
No, I would just, I think Sandhya ma'am has explained it very well. Actually, it's a ritual. The pithora, of course, they have now started drawing it on cloth and even on paper and selling it. But
No,
primarily, it
trying to
continues to be a ritual which is very important within the community. So there is it's very sacred to the Ratwa community, even now, even within the younger generation. So that tradition continues.
That's interesting. So that hasn't faded at all. In light of other changes, that seems to be very strong still in the community. That's very interesting. Sandhya, you wanted to say something additionally?
yeah, you see, they used to make these pithoras on canvas and on cloth and all that, but fortunately at the academy we have now discouraged them from doing that, because then people buy it and then they hang it wherever they want, and it's not correct.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. So it becomes commodified or
So,
commercialized. Yeah,
so
that's
what we
very,
do, so since every community has this family of pithora painters, okay, every village will have its family of pithora painters who will do the pithora for you during the non-harvest time when they are resting. Everybody is resting. That's the time when they do that. So what we tell them is that, okay, you make other drawings. You draw what you draw, the forest, you draw animals, you draw whatever you want. Don't draw the pithora for sale. But they're good painters in their own way. So that's
that's,
what we are encouraging
yeah,
them to.
that's interesting because when I was in a tourist shop, not in their area, but might have been Vadodara, I can't remember now, but it was just a people, a mark, just a shop with people who were not Ratwa or anything, but they were selling many items from all over the place, and on a wall, or not a wall, on a door of some sort of cabinet maybe, or some kind of wardrobe or something, was a painting of the Pitora, but I'm sure it wasn't made by a a Ratwa person, but it was copied by somebody who was not Ratwa, just as a way to make it look all tribal in there. And I thought that caught my. In fact, I took a photo of it because it caught my attention as an aspect of this commercialization that happens when it's taken away from its cultural context and, as we would say here a lot nowadays, culturally appropriated, so
Yeah,
that it's taken and then used for other purposes.
that's right.
Sonal, did you want to add anything to this discussion before we finish up?
Sonal?
No, I think Sandhya ma'am has, yeah, no, I think Sandhya ma'am has explained it quite well. And I think her paper, I've read a paper. There, it will explain many more things, many other aspects of the Pithora as well.
That's great. I'm very excited to see that. Thank you for sharing it. So
Actually, we have a book on the Pithora. I
okay.
would just like to add, we have a book on the Pithora
Oh,
written by our Adivasi colleagues, but it is in Gujarati.
oh, it's in Gujarati. Okay, yeah.
It is almost a 350-page book. Yeah. So someday we are actually translating it into English.
Hmm.
So maybe in a year or two, when we publish it, you can have a copy of it.
Oh, I would love that. Yes, I will stay hopeful about that, and I'm very excited to be able to get my hands on a copy. That's very exciting. So thanks for mentioning that. So yeah, we'll finish up with just one last question, and I thought your thoughts on this would be useful for everyone. So here we are with our Communities Connecting Heritage project, which we're calling Reclaiming Heritage 2, Part 2, and I'm just curious to know how you would characterize the impact that you hope this project will have on the Ratwa communities. How is it working to their advantage to participate in this project, and what do you hope that they achieve from it?
I think it will offer them a new
One thing
platform.
is
Of
that
course, they're
with
already using WhatsApp and
We can thank Zoom for the complications of individuals needing to speak and what happens when they try to speak at the same time. Sonal, you were speaking first, so let's hear from you, and then Sandhya, maybe you can help us cap it off with your thoughts. Sonal?
yeah, I was just saying that, see, in the Chota Udeipur district, many of the Ratwa community members smartphones. They're already using Facebook and other social media sites as WhatsApp. So, while this social movement is already going on, where they are asserting that Ratwa identity, and also they are legally they are fighting out the case about the Ratwa identity and the scheduled tribe status. But under this project, we feel that this will provide them with a new platform to assert their identity, to rethink about their culture, the various aspects of their culture, and share it across the community. So, while technology is not new to them, the issue is not new to them. Connecting the social movement with a new technological platform will, of course, be a new addition and would also help to take the movement forward in different ways.
Thank you, Sonal. Sandhya, what's your feeling about this?
my feeling is that this project will help us empower them with being able to communicate better with other tribals and extend the communication by several multiples, because otherwise it was only they would have posters, or it would be word of mouth or something like that. But I mean, it is amazing what WhatsApp can do. And if you make small podcasts and send it across, I mean, it can go viral, and it can go, I mean, 100 viewers can become like 100,000 within no time at all. So that way, I think the reach is phenomenal, and it will also encourage others to do things like that, to understand how to use these platforms to be able to get what they want to say across. We used it very well with the DNT, the Chara community, for creating awareness about COVID
Oh, really? Oh, wow. So that was just through a WhatsApp
and
sort
what
of
not to
network.
do, what to do, how to look
Mm.
after your. Doing the podcast. That's what gave me the idea for the podcast for this
Ah, of course. I remember that now. Yeah, there's those little episodes. I've seen a couple of them, and they were quite excellent.
thing. Yeah. So we're going to get Dakshin to teach our Adivasi people also how to make them.
Hmm.
He's part of the project in that sense.
And
So I
Dakshin
think
is
it
the
will be a
filmmaker.
good, the Charas, because the way they live, etc., would have been, there would have been a major, issue in COVID, because Ahmedabad was at one point of time very badly hit by
Mhm.
COVID, and there were lots of deaths.
Mm.
In fact, most of our people we know at Chara got it. Of
Mm.
course, fortunately, they had very few signs of it, or they were
Mm.
asymptomatic
Oh,
mostly.
that's good.
But
Yeah.
many of them tested positive. Fortunately, in India, we got a much less virulent, virulent type of that virus. So not so many people died, but not so many people died. Not like it's going on in the US.
I
That's
know
not
it's an
what's happened here.
amazing tragedy here, and such a shock to those who.
But also the thing is that here there is, to a large extent, people are wearing masks, they are not going out so much, etc. I mean, of course people do go out, not that they don't, but I'm told that in the US and all that, they're just not able to implement all of that.
Right.
Here you
Right.
have a fine. If you are caught without a mask, you have to pay a fine.
Oh, wow. Yeah, here it became immediately politicized. Okay, I think what we've talked about today is just rich and really enticing for learning more about what the Ratwa themselves produce in their videos, and our opportunity is coming to see through their own voices, as we learn Bhasha itself, the word means, through their own voices, an expression of what they value as part of their cultural heritage. So we're all really excited to see what they produce and to share with you what our participants are producing too. But I want to thank you both for taking time, this amount of time in your evening, to talk with me and to create this opportunity for my students to learn more about what's going on over there and put it into context. So this has been an amazing opportunity for me too. I've really enjoyed it and learned so much from you, as I always do whenever I talk with you. So thank you both for joining me, and we'll maybe look for another opportunity to talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have a happy weekend and we'll meet again, Mike. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Sonal. Thank you, Sandhya.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.